Good evening, everyone. I call to order this meeting of the Washington County Board of Education. We do have a quorum this evening. At this time, I'd like to introduce a kindergarten student from Funkstown Elementary School, Jeremiah Umohutwin. Jeremiah, would you like to come forward? Jeremiah is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Jeremiah, it's so nice to have you here this evening. Do you have some people with you that you would like to introduce? Yes? Who's there on the front row that you told me you would like to introduce? You have your-
Dad and my brother
Yes, yes, and who's the gentleman there on the end?
on the end.
Right here. From your school right here. Who is that?
Brother?
Your dad and your brother, and is that your principal there? Mr. Stark.
Now there's one person left.
Do you know him?
No, one person left that.
Yes, he is on the end. Yes. So you're in kindergarten, correct? Pre-K.
It's at Funkstown.
Oh, I have kindergarten here on my sheet. I've already promoted you.
Oh.
Pre-K, that's all the more impressive. So what do you like best about pre-K at Funkstown Elementary School?
Because it's fun.
It's fun? Well, I'm glad to hear that. What are some of the fun things that you're doing there?
And the dogs and there's bugs, but they're trapped in gas. And also there's a big one.
Uh-huh,
And the big one has a bigger gas.
uh-huh.
And it's a beetle, and it's the biggest beetle.
The biggest beetle.
Oh, my goodness.
My goodness. So are you learning some things there at Funkstown? You are? Can you share something that you've learned recently?
How to make circles.
How to make circles. That's
Yeah.
very, very
You
important.
put something in the middle. And wow.
Uh-huh.
Good job.
That's wonderful. And you were telling me about something that you like to do to play when you're not in school, and you shared something with me that I'm not familiar with at all, but you told me that Chris down here, our student rep, is familiar with it. Can you tell my friends here what that is that you were telling me?
Baby,
And what is that exactly?
it has a middle and
Uh-huh.
also a tip. And I got a new one, and it has a ball tip.
Uh-huh.
Has a ball one, and also the greatest fact of it is because it has a wheel
It has a wheel. Uh-huh.
around it.
So your father was telling me it's kind of like a top, is that right? That we
Yeah,
might
and
recognize
the
it?
battle, and
Oh, you battle.
you have a launch.
Oh.
Okay.
The other opponent spins it, and the other opponent does too.
Okay, well, I'm
And
gonna
also,
have to do some research on that. I'm gonna have to see if I can find some of that on YouTube.
you can type it on.
All right, I will certainly do
All
that.
right.
Well, Jeremiah, we want to thank you so much for being here, and thank you for leading us in the pledge this evening. And I hope you have a great year there at pre-K at Funkstown. Thank you.
Great job.
I love his facial expressions.
Okay, at this time, we'll have approval of this evening's agenda. Thank you, Mr. Bickford. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Stauffer. Any discussion about the agenda? If not, we'll move to the vote. All those in favor of approval? Okay, we have 6 affirmative votes and the student member concurs, so we have an approved agenda, and we'll move on then to the approval of the minutes.
Ms. Williams, I move for the approval of the closed session minutes dated September 3rd, 2019.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Murray. Are there any additions or corrections to the closed session minutes of September 3rd? Okay, if not, we'll move to the vote. All those in favor of approval? Okay, we have 6 affirmative votes.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. 5 affirmative votes. Do we have any abstentions? Thank you, Mr. Stauffer. 5 affirmative and 1 abstention. Mr. Gesford.
Yes, I move for the approval of the business meeting minutes dated September 3rd, 2019.
Thank you, Mr. Gesford. Is there a second? Second. Do we have any additions or corrections to the business meeting minutes of September 3rd? No? If not, we'll move to the vote. All those in favor of approval? Okay, we have 5 affirmative votes. Do we have any abstentions? Thank you, Mr. Stauffer. 1 abstention. Okay, at this time, we'll move to public comment. We do have 1 individual who is signed up to speak this evening. Landon,
Bye.
would you like to come forward, please? Landon, you want to have a seat over here at one of these microphones? I think they're all up and running, so wherever you're comfortable. Could you tell us, please, your full name and where you live?
My name is Landon Miles French, and I live in Keedysville.
In Keedysville? Okay, could you pull that microphone down just a little bit? Maybe we can get a little better sound. Okay? Whenever you're ready.
I am 9 years old, and I am 4th grade at Boonesboro Elementary School, and I'm in the MAGRIT program, and I love this community, and I will make it even better by using wind turbines that I saw in Iowa.
Wind turbines?
Windmills.
Uh-huh.
And windmills usually cost 1.3 million to 2.2 million per megawatt. Most 2.2 megawatts and cost to $3 to $4 million to install. They can create 600,000 jobs in manufacturing, installation, maintenance, and etc. by 2050. They will take about 10 years to pay back. That's all I have.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that information.
I came up with the wind turbine idea by seeing a lot in Iowa and how much they energy they produce, and I think they will produce about at least half of the community's energy.
Very interesting. Thank you. Colleagues, do you have any questions or comments? You know who I think would find this information also very interesting?
Who?
Our county commissioners. Have you thought about going there and speaking during public comment?
No, I don't think so.
No? You may want to share that information. Well, thank you. It's very
Thank you.
informative. We appreciate you coming.
When this project came up, we were in Iowa on a county vacation. We see all these windmills,
Uh-huh.
and some of them were producing energy for where?
It was producing from Iowa all the way to Wisconsin,
Really?
and that's 6 to 7 hours to drive.
Uh-huh.
Use up all the wind, right?
Yeah, and so on the news when I was in Iowa, this lady came up to the news and said, "Windmills will use up all the wind."
not the case. So not the case, right?
No.
No.
It's nice that you're familiarizing yourself with this. There are a lot of people that thumb their nose at alternative energy like wind. You know, wind's not going to go away, and if wind stops one day, that doesn't mean it's a failure.
Yeah, it's a renewable resource.
It is absolutely that, and it doesn't harm the environment whatsoever. So, thank you for researching it, because you're going to be one of the advocates for, you know, things that can protect our environment and things that can help us have the power that we need to live the way we want to live. So you're doing a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
wanna say something.
Thank you, Dan.
Dan has
Oh, Mr. Stauffer.
I want to say
Just a
something.
minute, Landon.
When I go to New England, Vermont, probably been 10 years ago, we're driving along on this road. I look up on this hill, and about every quarter of a mile, half a mile, there was a windmill, which I was surprised to see up there, because I don't think of the wind blowing through those mountains and so forth. I guess that it does. Maybe we should have them on for WCPS. I mean, we have cell towers, so why not windmill?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the biggest concerns was people wouldn't like to see them, right?
Yeah.
But they don't see them anymore, right?
Yeah.
They're just like a water tower. People don't really pay attention to them.
And also, one of the cons of it, it could be a threat to wildlife too.
Yeah.
Especially the birds.
Well, again, Landon, we thank you very much for coming
Thank
and
you.
sharing your research with us. And do consider going down and speaking to the county commissioners, especially with regard to the economy and jobs. They might be interested in hearing about
Do you have
that.
information as far as when it is? When is that?
They meet on Tuesdays. I think they meet every Tuesday, and I think they start maybe as early as 9 in the morning.
And they,
If you go to their website, it'll have a list of their meeting dates and times.
And they occasionally do evening meetings in towns, which might be more convenient for you.
And tonight
but-
they were in Smithsburg.
Yeah, you can also write them a letter, too.
Or an email.
I think in person is done.
I do too.
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you, Landon. Okay, we'll go on to old business. Our first item of old business is the consideration of the second reading of proposed policy JLD, school safety, threat assessment team, and behavior threat assessment. Good evening, Mr. Trotta.
Good evening. On September the 3rd, the Board of Education approved the first reading of policy JLD. An inquiry was received from a member of the community as to whether this was a new policy. I responded to that inquiry that it was a new policy, and I also provided background information on this proposed policy. The Policy Committee is requesting the approval of the second reading of policy JLD. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trotta. Is there a motion?
Yes, Madam President, I move to approve the second reading of proposed policy JLD entitled School Safety, Threat Assessment Team, and Behavior Threat Assessment Policy.
Thank you, Mr. Stauffer. Is there a second?
second.
Thank you, Mrs. Murray. Any discussion or any questions? Okay, then we'll move to the vote. We're voting to approve the second reading of proposed policy JLD entitled School Safety Threat Assessment Team and Behavior Threat Assessment Policy. All those in favor? Okay, we have 6 affirmative votes and the student member concurs. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Our next item of old business is the second reading of proposed changes to policy JFH, policy prohibiting bullying, harassment, or intimidation.
Thank you. On September the 3rd, the Board of Education approved the proposed modifications to this particular policy. These modifications were necessary as a result of amendments to state law in this particular area. The community was provided an opportunity to offer comments. No comments were received. The Policy Committee is requesting the approval of the second reading of policy JFH. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trotta. Is there a motion?
Yes, Madam President, I move to approve the second reading of proposed changes to policy JFH entitled Policy Prohibiting Bullying, Harassment, or intimidation.
Thank you, Mr. Stalter. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Bickford. Any discussion or any questions for Mr. Trotta? I do have something, if I may.
Yes.
I serve as a member of the policy committee, and I know we've spent a lot of time crafting this policy, discussing this policy, and as I was reading through it again in preparation for this meeting, the words substantially, seriously caught my eye. And at the time I was reading it again, I thought, well, those are very subjective words. Who has the burden of proof when it comes to whether or not an act of something that's being alleged as bullying, harassment, or intimidation is substantially interfering, or if it's seriously intimidating?
First of all, the inclusion of that word is as a result of state law, and that actually is a word that appears in state law, which is undefined.
Okay.
And what would occur is that if there is a bullying or harassment form that is submitted by a parent or a guardian, school officials would conduct a review, and they would be looking at that as to whether it was substantial. I think Dr. Akers was at our policy committee meeting where he explained that it's not really that it has to be of a serious nature, but what they're looking at is if it's something that really, it's not a case of children just teasing one another, which sometimes people will say, well, that amounts to bullying. It really has to be something where there's something of substance related to the allegation. So it would be, the school officials would be the ones that have to determine, based on all the evidence that has been presented to them, as to whether it reaches the level of being substantial.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions or comments regarding the policy? Okay, then the motion is to approve the second reading of proposed changes to policy JFH entitled Policy Prohibiting Bullying, Harassment, or Intimidation. All those in favor? All right, we have 6 affirmative votes, and the student member concurs. Motion carries. And that concludes our old business, and we'll move to our first item of new business, which is a first reading of a policy. This is proposed policy IKAB, Grading System for Elementary Schools.
Thank you. As a result of a regulation that has just recently been adopted by the State Board of Education, local school systems across the state of Maryland have to have a written process for reporting in elementary school students' grades. The academic team, in close consultation with the policy committee, prepared the attached new policy, IKAB, which sets forth that process. The policy committee is requesting the Board of Education's approval of the first reading of this new policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trotta. Is there a motion?
Madam President, I move to approve the first reading of proposed policy IKAB entitled Grading System for Elementary Schools.
Thank you, Mr. Stauffer. Is there a second? Thank you, Mrs. Murray. Any discussion? Any questions regarding this policy? Okay, then we'll move to the vote, which is the approval of the first reading of proposed policy IKAB entitled Grading System for Elementary Schools. All those in favor? 6 affirmative votes, and the student member concurs. We have another policy to consider, and this is the first reading of policy IKC, Grade Change Requirements and Appeals.
Thank you. As a result of concerns about the practices of a particular school system regarding the changing of students' grades, the Maryland State Department of Education adopted a new regulation that requires local boards of education to have a written policy on the changing of grades. Such a policy is also to address the process that one would follow if they want to appeal an assigned grade. My office, in consultation with staff and the members of the policy committee, prepared this brand-new policy, which is patterned after the requirements in the new state regulation. The policy requires the superintendent to adopt an administrative regulation that establishes the procedures that must be followed to change a grade or to appeal a grade. The policy committee is requesting the approval of the first reading of this policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trotta. Is there a motion?
Madam President, I move to approve the first reading of proposed policy IKC entitled Grade Change Requirements and Appeals.
Thank you, Mr. Stauffer. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Bickford. Any discussion, questions? Okay, then we'll move to the vote. We're voting to approve the first reading of proposed policy IKC entitled Grade Change Requirements and Appeals. All those in favor? Okay, we have 6 affirmative votes and the student member concurs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trotta. Our next item of new business is the fiscal year 2021 General Fund Operating Budget Calendar. Good evening, Mr. Pruitt.
Good evening, Mrs. Williams, Dr. Michael, members of the board. I'm here this evening to present to you the FY 2021 General Fund Budget Calendar. It's hard to think here in the third week of September that it's time to talk about the budget that begins next July, but that time never ceases to get away from us. I'd like to highlight a few of the dates that I think are key to the passage and adoption of the board's budget as they head for 2021. Staff will be working here directly and is already looking at requests from schools. The superintendent should present a draft budget at a work session on December 10th. We anticipate to receive preliminary state aid calculations from MSD on or around January 21st of 2020. And subsequent to that, we'll notify the county's executive, the county administrator, and the CFO of the board's preliminary request based on the superintendent's draft budget. There'll be additional work session on February 4th and a public hearing on March 3rd, leading into a tentative adoption date of the board's budget on March 17th. The Finance Committee reviewed this calendar at their meeting on August 27th and recommended it for the board's approval. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Pruitt. Is there a motion?
President, I move to approve the proposed FY 2021 budget calendar as a general guideline for development of the fiscal 2021 budget.
Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Are there any questions for Mr. Pruitt or any discussion of the budget calendar? Okay, then we'll move to the vote on Mr. Bickford's motion of approval. All those in favor? Okay, we have 6 affirmative votes and the student member concurs.
Thank you.
Very much. Okay, our final item of new business is nominations for the Maryland Association of Boards of Education committee assignments. And you should have self-nominated or self-nominations on a sheet of paper for the various committees. We have someone who is willing to serve on all but 3 of the committees. If there's anyone who's interested in serving on Federal Relations Network Committee or the Nominating Committee or the MABE Awards Committee, now would be the time to step forward. Okay. Is there a motion?
Mrs. Williams, I move for the approval of the self-nominations for MABE committee assignments as presented by President Williams and the sending of board endorsements of those nominations to MABE.
Thank you. Mr. Gessert, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Stauffer. All those in favor? Okay, we have 6 affirmative votes and the student member concurs. Motion carries. So we have approval. And Mrs. Chekovic is going to be sending that information down so that we meet the deadline with May. Move to the superintendent's report. Dr. Michael.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Our first part of the superintendent's report this evening will be a discipline and suspension report. We provide this information annually to the Board of Education and publicly. And our Director of Student Services, School Counseling, and School Health, Mr. Jeremy Jacoby, will be providing that report tonight. We also have a work session in the near future regarding discipline. If the board members have items that they'd like to see covered at that work session, or if there are questions this evening, Mr. Jacoby wants to gather additional information for, we certainly can share that during that work session. So with that, Mr. Jacoby, if you just offer a brief report on our status, that'd be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Good evening, President Williams, board members, and Dr. Michael. I'll be presenting the annual discipline and suspensions report this evening. The first slide that's displayed shows the tiered systems of behavioral supports and interventions that's been in place in Washington County Public Schools for many years. At the bottom of the pyramid are a listing of some of our universal Tier 1 supports. We have classroom management, school rules and procedures, positive behavioral interventions and supports, and WCPS discipline guidelines, policies, and regulations. All of these items are established to create expectations for students. At the Tier 2 level, which is shown in yellow, starts the targeted interventions for students that are experiencing struggles within school. Some that I have listed here are referrals to counseling, referral to the student support team, various types of restorative approaches such as conflict resolution, peer mediation, and conferences. And in some cases, we have students that will have behavior intervention plans and also safety plans. As far as a Tier 3 intervention, these are for the intensive responses to student discipline matters. This could involve alternative placements at Antietam Academy or perhaps a assignment of a specialized program. For example, a Summit School location or a non-public program. Part of our Tier 1 support, again, is the classroom environment. And teachers are evaluated on the following 5 components: creating an environment of respect and rapport, establishing a culture for learning, managing classroom procedures, managing student behavior, organizing physical space. These 5 components of the teacher evaluation are supported in many ways. We have a new teacher academy every year that provides PD for teachers in this area. Teachers have access to department leaders, lead teachers in their building. They also have access to both school-based and central office-based mentors. Schools have monthly new teacher meetings, and the county also offers county mentor forums specific to Domain 2, classroom management. Another Tier 1 support is positive behavioral interventions and supports. It's a framework that focuses on prevention, not punishment. There's explicit teaching of behavioral expectations to students, so the students are learning social, emotional, and behavioral skills, how to interact with their peers, and how to manage their own emotions. Part of the framework requires promoting positive behaviors, so there is frequent recognition of expected behaviors. This framework improves school safety. It leads to reduced disciplinary infractions. The efforts within PBIS are all data-driven. The key to success with PBIS, it takes a 3 to 5 year commitment with staff, and the components to PBIS have to be implemented with fidelity. Currently, we have 22 PBIS schools in Washington County. We have 15 additional schools that are PBIS modeled programs, and we anticipate between 4 and 6 additional schools receiving PBIS training this summer of 2020. Also within our Tier 1 supports are the WCPS disciplinary guidelines. These are published annually in the Washington County Handbook and Guide. The purpose of the guidelines are to discourage inappropriate student behavior, inform parents and students of potential consequences for misconduct, applies progressive discipline as misconduct persists, and provides a range of potential consequences for each offense. So on the next slide, I took a snapshot, just a part of the guideline chart. It's located in the handbook and guide that all students and parents have. On the left, you can see each offense is defined, and there is a range of potential consequence for the different infractions. This is used as a guide by school administrators. They can deviate from this if they feel that the situation warrants it. Looking closely at various disciplinary consequences from this past school year. This graph shows the types of consequences that were imposed as a result of misconduct. So starting in the upper left corner, we have parent conferences, student conferences, and warning was the outcome for 26% of the incidents this past school year. And moving counterclockwise, 21% of the time detentions were assigned. That could be a before school, after school, could be a lunch detention or a Saturday school. 15% of the time, administrators provided a response that was what we call a support referral. It could be a referral to a counselor, a referral to the student support team, student assistance program, or an outside agency. Also in this category are matters of restitution and community service. 14% of the time, students were excluded from a single class. So that would be an exclusion for less than 1 hour per day. 11% of the time, the outcome was an assignment of in-school suspension. 6% of the time, the outcome was an out-of-school suspension. 4% of the time was loss of privilege. And 3% of the time led to a bus removal. Closer look at in-school suspensions over the past 4 years. As you can see, there's been a decrease over the past 4 years with the number of students and the percent of students that were assigned an in-school suspension. This past year, we had 927 different students that were assigned an in-school suspension, which is 4.25% of our student population. Most of our in-school suspensions were as a result of disrespect or disruption. Another important statistic with in-school suspension, 68% of the students that were assigned in-school suspension for the first time did not commit an additional offense that led to a second in-school suspension assignment. So there are often not repeat offenders that are assigned to ISS. Looking closely at out-of-school suspensions, we had 596 different students that were suspended from school this past year, less than 3% of our population. It's about the same number and percent of students that were suspended the prior year. We do have the 5th lowest out-of-school suspension rate in Maryland among the 24 counties. The majority of our suspensions were as a result of fighting or assaults. Another statistic that I'll throw out this evening, 77% of the students that were suspended this past school year did not commit a subsequent offense that led to a second suspension. So we're hoping to see these numbers decrease this coming school year. As you know, we have in place additional counseling staff, social workers at our schools. We've streamlined our mental health services and our referral process. We've provided teachers and will continue to provide teachers with a variety of professional development, PBIS, PD with restorative practices this school year, crisis to calm training, poverty and equity training. We also have at the school level, each of our schools have within their school improvement plan under Goal 3 actions that they're going to take to help reduce suspensions from school. So in summary, Washington County Public School provides a safe culture for all students to learn. Since 2012, there's been a 29% reduction of the number of incidents that warranted an out-of-school suspension. So we went from a little over 1,100 suspensions from school in 2012, and this past year we had a little over 800. Most recent staff survey showed that 91% of our staff felt safe at school. Our schools are utilizing the tiered system of interventions and supports. Teachers are establishing positive classroom environments, and they're given the necessary support in PD. And our data shows that the in-school suspension and out-of-school suspension are used judiciously and as last resort options. 83%, if you remember the pie chart that you saw a few slides ago, 83% of the incidents last year were resolved without the need for excluding students from all classes or school.
I think Mr. Jacoby would be glad to entertain any questions you might have.
Any questions? People processing?
I have a question. I'm going to go back to the PBIS. You said that more schools were going to be trained in PBIS this summer. Once a school goes through PBIS training, do they have to continue like on a yearly basis, every other year? How often do they have to have training for PBIS? Is it continuous?
I don't know how, maybe you know the answer. I don't know how often it is, but I know we had a room full of staff members here, packed. This room was packed with retraining. So I think there's a ongoing retraining for PBIS. I don't know how often it is. And then there's initial training for any schools that want to become a PBIS school. And then I think there's obviously some recognition at various levels of PBIS, gold, silver, and bronze PBIS school. And we're actually going to be recognizing some of our schools, I think, at the next board meeting. But I don't know if you know the exact parameters for training or not.
I do not. But I'll look into that and make sure that you have that information.
All right, thank you.
I definitely was in attendance at 2 different levels of training, and I know one was for schools that were already trained, and one was for new schools that were interested in being trained in PBIS.
Any other questions?
I have a question. I was really glad to hear about the relatively low number of non-repeat offenders, right? You do hear with out-of-school suspension, I guess in your experience as a principal and what you're doing now, how is that a good disciplinary, like what sort of impact have you seen? Because some people say making kids leave school for a few days is giving them a few days off. So did you see evidence that when you would give them out-of-school suspension, not you necessarily, but what evidence do you see that that's a good disciplinary move?
Yeah, I think the determination as to whether or not to exclude a student from school comes down to the safety of that student plus the other students in the building.
Got it.
So I think that's the judgment that's made by the administrator when they make that decision that the student, the behavior that the student displayed warrants a suspension.
And then when they come back, I'd assume they're on everybody's radar at this point, but.
Some students return with a safety plan. Others are required by policy and procedure to return with a parent for a return from suspension conference, where they lay out expectations. Sometimes that involves the development of a safety plan or other measures that the school will put in place to ensure the safety of everyone.
Okay, great. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Question that kind of piggybacks on that. You mentioned with regard to out-of-school suspensions that most of those are due to fighting and assaults. So when the students return to school after a suspension, and you've mentioned that many of them return with a plan, do any of them get the kind of guidance or counseling or referrals to perhaps an outside agency even that would help them with dealing with that kind of aggression and difficulty?
And that's part of the process, both at the front end, from the start the suspension can also occur, that conversation and networking with outside agencies can occur during the return from suspension.
Okay, so that would be part of the plan, then,
Yes.
something along those lines?
Mhm.
Okay, and then my second question deals with the pie chart, the disciplinary consequences. In-school suspension, 11%, and then excluded from class, 14%, and I'm assuming from what you said that the difference is in-school suspension, they're out for the entire day in the in-school, the ISS room, the in-school suspension room, whereas if they're excluded from class, it may be just one class that they had an infraction in and they needed to be perhaps put in the ISS room for,
It could even be
Just that
part.
class period?
Yeah, it could even be part of the class period.
okay.
So it could be upwards of the 50-minute class period, or it could be a 20-minute isolation from class.
Okay, so when we look at the chart then that shows in-school suspension, and we're seeing that there has been a reduction in the number of students from, let's say, 17, 18 to 18, 19, a reduction in the number of students receiving in-school suspension, can we infer then that the reason for that is we're not putting kids in in-school suspension all day, that we're maybe using this idea of just excluding them from a particular class as opposed to saying you're going in this ISS room?
Yeah,
For
so
the day.
the data's fluid, so that certainly could be happening. Our suspension counts went up from 2 years ago, so it could also be just the increase with suspensions as well. So I think it's kind of just fluid.
Fluid?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question, I'm sorry.
Sure, Mr.
It
Vickers.
came up. What other ways do we use to track discipline issues in schools, or even when, like, do we track when a assistant principal is called in to help, or they've called in for outside help, and how do we use that to measure what schools might need more support?
I would probably say from the referral process, generally if assistant principal or principal is called to the room for some reason, it generally follows with some type of referral. Might not always be the case, particularly like with some of our summit programs and things like that, where we just have children that have a variety of emotional challenges and there just needs to be some additional support. We recognize that when we staff schools, when we place a summit program or life skills program or something like that, that again, not necessarily discipline-wise, but just requires additional administrative support. But I would say the referral process itself is really our tracking mechanism, and how that the state delegates, particularly for in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, the requirements we have for tracking that information. We have always followed the state procedure guidance manual. I can't think the exact title right now, but Washington County has faithfully reported things as required by the state, whatever that might be. So
So do you feel confident you're aware when extra support personnel are called into a classroom to help?
I wouldn't say that I'm aware, but I think we track that. I think we're aware, particularly, Dr. Palmer, Dr. Akers are aware of schools are having ongoing issues, and we have those conversations when there's need for additional staffing for various reasons.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Jacoby.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jacoby.
Thank you.
One thing I will say about the discipline suspension, for being around for 41 years, I can tell you there's a time we suspended thousands of students. So to have a number under 1,000, I think is pretty remarkable, and have our schools under control. They're not perfect. We're dealing with human beings and young people with minds of their own. But there was a time, I can assure you this report would have been in the thousands, several thousand, not just 1,000 or more. So we're making a lot of progress. We still have a lot of work to do with our students. Today, we received notice that our Northern Middle School and North High connection there with the International Baccalaureate Program, the middle school years program has been officially approved at Northern Middle School. So we're very proud of that. That was a 3-year process, a lot of hard work by the principals, IB coordinators there, staff. It's one of those processes where you have to prove everything up front before you get approved. So we've had a ton of trainings and a lot of people, a lot of staff members away for IB training. had to share our curriculum, other things like that, and we were officially approved today, so congratulations to Northern Middle and their connection to North High. And I was just there today, and I didn't know that information, so I'll be going back out there before the end of the week to congratulate them, I hope.
So did we have students at Northern Middle in a program that now is officially sanctioned, or?
It is officially sanctioned. We've been enrolling students and working them with the IB process, and that is what part of the requirement is, but now we're officially sanctioned and approved, so.
And this is a magnet program that people can apply to be in and attend Northern Middle to.
They can.
Okay.
Yep, and that'd be a natural feeder to North High, but not a requirement to go to North High's IB program. Okay, and the last thing I have for today, thanks to Aaron Anderson and Public Information, Aaron put out a request to the public. If you'd like to share your first day of school experience with us, to submit a photo. I think we had over 700 people submit photos of their children. And Aaron's kind of put together a little 2 or 3 minute video here with some other people sharing their thoughts. So it's really about opening day, but I thought it was pretty neat. I watched it this afternoon. I just wanted to share it with the board as my final comments for this evening. So.
Welcome to the new school year. Remember, have fun, work hard, and always try to do your best.
Welcome back to a new school year. We hope everyone works hard this year and try to make your today better than your yesterday.
Wanting to wish everyone a happy and safe school year.
Just wanted to welcome our students and our faculty back on day one of 180. We look forward to building student literacy skills and building great relationships with our community.
I would just like to wish everyone a wonderful 2019-2020 school year. Best wishes to all our students.
Great.
Apologize for the buffering issues, and obviously we couldn't put all 700 pictures up there. I was forced to put the one picture up there of me because the other 3 people would have been cut out of the video is what I was told. So But we do appreciate staff putting that together, and to all the parents who sent in pictures. I thought it was just kind of a really neat way to kick off the school year. And we'll probably be doing the next year. You saw people holding up the little green sign. That was something the public information pushed out to have an opportunity for parents to do that as well. So thank you.
Can I say something? Just being in the marketing field, we would kill for the number of likes that the WCPS account got for that particular enterprise. I mean, it was, well, how many did you get, Aaron? About 700 submissions of photos, which for people to engage that much with a request on social media is pretty extraordinary.
Lots of happy smiling faces.
Yeah.
That's what we like to see. Beaming smiles.
Keep that going.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Michael. We'll move on to personnel action. Dr. Bishop.
Good evening, Mrs. Williams, Dr. Michael, and board members. As discussed earlier in closed session, there's several staff changes for your review tonight. At this time, I ask for your approval of today's personnel actions.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
And I move that we approve the staff changes dated September 17th, 2019.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Motion is Mr. Ridenour's on approval of today's personnel actions. All those in favor? Okay, we have 6 affirmative votes. Motion carries. Thank you, Dr. Bishop. All right, we'll move to reports to the board, and we'll have board member committee reports. Mr. Ridenour, would you like to be in?
We have nothing right now.
Okay, thank you.
Facilities met, Mrs. Williams, and we reviewed the Sharpsburg Elementary project in Sharpsburg. We also got an update on the academic hub downtown. We will, as a committee, be attending some of those field shows, field trips as a committee, and that's all we have right now.
Mr. Gessler. Mr. Bickford.
Nothing new for finance. We have a meeting on the scheduled for October 29th at 8 a.m.
Mrs. Murray?
Curriculum and instruction will meet on September 24th at 4 p.m. in the board conference room.
Mr. Mackley?
The Washington County Association of Student Councils will be meeting October 1st from approximately 9:30 till 1 o'clock, which is an hour before our board work session here. We'll be meeting at South High in the auditorium. That'll be our first General Assembly meeting of the school year. I'll send you guys emails with more information. But we have a goal of being more active in our advocacy in the community, so that means we'll probably be seeing more members at our Board of Education meetings here, and maybe speaking during public comment time as well.
That would be great.
That's all I've got.
Thank you, Mr. Mackley. Okay, we move to miscellaneous business, future agenda items. We should have a list of future agenda items. Coming up in October, we have a presentation of the audited financial statements and the auditor's report. We'll be looking at student achievement for 2018-2019 school year. And on October 15th, our second meeting in October, we'll have a report on summer school. Looking forward to that. And that same meeting, we will have a presentation dealing with the ESSA strategic plan. And we have new teacher report and SAT and ACT data report coming up in November on the 5th. So those are upcoming future agenda items. If you have anything else you would like to see on an agenda, please let a member of the Agenda Planning Committee know. Let's move to board member comments. Mr. Mackley, would you like to begin?
I have nothing tonight.
Thank you. Mrs. Murray?
I have nothing.
Thank you. Mr. Bickford?
Nothing.
Nothing? Mr. Stauffer?
Nothing.
Nothing? Mr. Gessler?
Nothing.
Well done.
Well done. I just have something, if I may.
Always have to have the last word, don't you?
I'd like to have this one this evening. I'd like to read something that came to us, to board members, This is a memorandum that we get periodically, and I guess it's weekly, from every Friday from our superintendent, Dr. Michael. This one is dated September 9th through September 13th, and I'd like to read something with regard to the Interagency Commission on School Construction, or as we call it here, the IAC. The IAC met on September 12th, and they adopted their annual maintenance report for fiscal year 2019. And I'm going to read directly from this memorandum. It shows that WCPS is one of 5 LEAs which are rated as having superior maintenance. It also shows that WCPS facilities are the 5th oldest in the state, 32 years, and the oldest of the school systems that received a superior rating. Our facilities and maintenance department is to be commended for its work in caring for our school buildings. So I would just like to say thank you, maintenance department. Thank you, custodians. Thank you to all of those who work so hard to care for our school buildings, because we are so very fortunate to have them, and very fortunate to have them receive such a rating. That's my final word. If nothing further, we'll stand adjourned.